Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Maryland Photography Alliance's Artist Spotlight webinar series. My name is Steve Sattler, and I have the honor of serving as MPA's president, and I will be your host today. I'd like to introduce other members of the MPA team who you'll have contact with today. Mike Washington is from the Carroll County Camera Club and serves as MPA's treasurer. Mike will be facilitating the polls, which will take place, as well as making files available to you should you choose to download them. Steve Bruza is from the Bowie Crofton Camera Club and Creative Exposure Baltimore, and also serves as a member of MPA's Board of Directors. Steve will be monitoring the chat screen and preparing questions for Hazel. Also on our webinar team is Sandy Nichols from the Baltimore Camera Club. Sandy will also be monitoring questions. Our software license only allows 4 people to facilitate a webinar, so you won't see Sandy today, but on future webinars. Today's webinar is on Turn Ho-Hum into a Work of Art, and we are very fortunate to have nationally known photographer Hazel Meredith as our presenter. Hazel decided to create the MPA decided to create the Artist Spotlight webinar series, not only to bring talented artists from around the country to you for educational purposes, but to also raise money for the Maryland Food Bank to help those so much in need these days. COVID-19 has impacted employment and dramatically impacted families. Too many people can't pay bills today and do not have enough to eat. At the end of Hazel's presentation, we will ask for voluntary donations, which you can make during this presentation. We've set up a fundraising page on the Maryland Food Bank's website, and all donations will go directly to them. We've already raised over $2,900, which has provided over 8,700 meals. We hope to do even better with your help today. It's my distinct honor today to introduce Hazel Meredith. Hazel is an award-winning photographer, teacher, speaker, workshop leader, and a highly respected competition judge. She teaches at camera clubs and conferences across the U.S., as well as through her own workshops. And Hazel is a frequent webinar presenter for Topaz Labs. Hazel loves the creative aspect of photography and post-processing, especially the use of textures, overlays, and software to create unique images. In 2017, she and her husband, Dave, founded the Creative Photography Conference in New England. And Hazel was actively involved with the photographic community and has received honorary distinctions from many organizations. Without further ado, I present to you Hazel Meredith. Hazel, take it away.
Thank you, Steve. That was a very nice introduction. Let me turn on my screen share and share. And let me open up my Photoshop. Can you see my Photoshop okay? Alrighty.
Yes, we can.
Super. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Today what I'm going to do for everybody is I have 6 projects planned, and I'm going to go through taking images such as this one that may not be perfect, but we still like them. Sometimes it's an image you've taken on a vacation or a trip and you may not get back there again. And even though it's not perfect, we can turn it into something pretty cool and artistic. And I also like to take images that may be from iconic locations that everybody has, especially when we're in camera clubs, and turn it into something uniquely my own by using textures and Topaz and some other things. So we're going to start with a few simple things and then get into some projects that are a little more involved. So I'll go ahead and get rolling. As Steve said, we're going to have a bunch of downloads for you at the end of the webinar today. I do have the notes available if you guys have watched any of the webinars I've been doing for Topaz or my own over the last few months. I've been on my website selling the notes, which include all of the detailed instructions, as well as the images and textures that I'll be using on these projects, so you can recreate them yourself and follow along with the replay of the webinar. Alrighty, so we're going to get started with this. So I've opened up my first image into Photoshop. I always do my basic editing in Lightroom, so when they come into Photoshop, they've been tweaked, usually the basics, color and brightness and contrast and that kind of stuff I'll do in Lightroom. So this particular image, and I didn't realize it until I was looking at it again yesterday, if I look at the size of this one, this was a cell phone image. So it's got a very low resolution and a very large size. So I'm actually going to resize this right now, and I'm going to change it to 300 dpi. And because I'm going to up the resolution, but I'm going to lower the size quite a bit, so it's not going to deteriorate the image or get it pixelated. If I just went up on the resolution and left it at that size, it would become pretty awful. So I'm going to go down to 15 inches wide. And this has kind of become my standard size to save images at. It gives me a good size for reproducing and printing. And it works well for me. I think I started doing that when I was doing prints in competitions, and usually wanted to print in 11 by 14, so that always gave me plenty of room to work with. So the first thing I always do when I bring in an image to Photoshop is do a Control-J, Command-J if you're on a Mac, and duplicate my background layer. I always preserve my original file just in case we save over it by accident. And the other thing too, you're going to see me doing today, because I have two monitors and I have all of the images for today set up in order on my second screen. So when I bring in images, instead of going to File, Open, you're going to kind of just see them appear because I'm dragging them in from the other screen. So it's not magic, it's just that I'm working with two monitors and it makes life a whole lot easier. So the first thing I want to do with this image is get rid of this stray little leaf here and this other partial flower down here. So I'm going to use the healing and the clone tools to get rid of that. So I'm going to start with the healing brush and make my brush a little bigger. To make your brushes bigger, I use the bracket keys that are to the right of the letter P on your keyboard. And we're just going to try and get rid of this real quick. Sometimes the healing brush works well, sometimes not as well. That will do. And then down here, I'm going to show you a pretty cool trick, actually. Instead of healing and cloning, sometimes when I have something that's got a nice solid color like this and something's near the edge I want to get rid of, I use the smudge tool. And I just kind of push the color down. And it actually it's smudging this background, but it's pushing that color right off the edge of the page. So it gives you a better blend sometimes than the healing and clone tools. And if I get streaks, then I sometimes will go back with the healing tool and just kind of smooth it out a little. One thing to be careful of, if you're too close to a subject, when you start doing that, you're going to start pulling and distorting your subject. So I try to stay away from that and just use it for like this part of the image. And then I'm going to come back in now and use my clone tool. And I'm going to zoom in, and we're going to do a little bit of cloning and get rid of some of this stuff here. And I'm just going to, I'm doing this a little quicker than I normally would, but just kind of make that bud look a little bit better there. I'm going to go back to the smudge and kind of blend that color a little. So that will work, because I know I'm going to be putting some textures and things over this, so that will work okay in the long run. So we've now gotten rid of our two petals. So the next thing I want to do, and I'm really big at working on different layers and labeling my layers, especially if I think it's something I'm going to want to recreate for a webinar or a tutorial. So I'll just put on here that I did my, heal, clone, smudge. So I Okay, I can't type either today. Smudge. And then I'm going to duplicate that layer again. And then I'm going to take this into Topaz Studio. On pretty much every image, I use AI Clear. And what AI Clear does, and that's one of the filters in Studio too, is it's doing clarity, detail, and denoise all in one shot. And that's up under the filter menu. I have it one of my favorites, so I'm just going to click on AI Clear. And probably 99% of the time I don't change anything here unless I really need to enhance the sharpness or if it's a little bit noisier. I do have, denoise if it's an exceptionally noisy image, a low light situation, concert shot, that type of thing. But for overall images, and if I do a split screen, you can, let's do my view. You can kind of see the before and after. I won't do this on every image, but here's the before. And there's the after. And you can see it's crisped up some of these petals in there. It's smoothed out the background, gotten rid of any noise that was in there. There's some like banding color going on in here. And it's really smoothed that out really nicely. So I'm going to go back to my Singer view. I'm just going to say accept because I'm going back to Photoshop. I'm not saving this photo separately yet. And again, if I turn this on and off, you can see the before and the after. It's subtle, but it really makes a huge difference on all my images. Okay, so if you want to, you can also name that. That would be AI Clear. And let's see, what am I doing next? I'm going to use a preset, or what are now called looks in Studio. So I want to reduplicate this layer. And I'm going to go back over here to Studio. Now I could have applied AI Clear and then done a preset while I was still there. And that's perfectly fine as well. But again, I like to do things on separate layers. So if I come back to Photoshop with a preset and decide, after all, I don't really like it, it's easy to just delete that layer and not have to, redo the AI Clear part of it or anything else. So I'm going to click on Add a Look. And because I know the name of this preset, I'm just going to type it in the search box. And this one is called Dream Strokes. And it's going to pop up right here. And this is going to give it a really pretty soft painterly look. It's going to mask the fact that, some of that wasn't quite tack sharp. So now to work with this preset, I'm going to hit Apply. And that's going to show you everything that was contained or what makes up that preset. So if I wanted to go in and change any of the settings in Impression, I would just click that layer and you could come down here and there's all kinds of settings that you can change within it. I'm not going to do that at the moment, and I'm looking for my other control. It's kind of slid over to the other screen with the screen sharing function. So I'm just going to say accept and go back to Photoshop. And then the last thing that I did to this is I'm going to add one of my own grunge borders. I don't want to be a commercial today, but I will let you know that I do have a few new texture sets on sale through Friday, and you'll see more about that at the end. And one of the sets is these grunge borders. And what I'm going to do with this one is I've brought it in. It's actually already the same size, so I'm just going to click the check mark. Now, obviously, that doesn't look very good, but the way we make textures or anything work with our image is by changing blending modes and opacities. So for this one, I'm going to change it to screen, which is going to make it lighter, and I'm going to leave the opacity at 100%. The one thing I did decide to do, and I was looking at like where the texture was falling in relation to my image, and I decided to rotate this texture 180 degrees because there was more texture here. And I don't know, after looking at it before, I thought it would look better that way. So the way we can do that, there's two ways. The quick way is to just do Control Command T to bring back the handles. And if I put my cursor up in the corner and get the curved arrow, I can just drag it. And when you get close to square, if you hold the Shift key, it'll make sure it's nice and straight for you. And hit the check. So now it just, I don't know, I like the way this side blended. It wasn't as sharp an edge over here, and it just looked better to me. And then the other thing I decided to do was I wanted to actually make this texture slightly larger than the image, so there would be less of it covering the flower. And you can do that with any kind of textures you use. I'm actually going to make this a little bigger than my photo size. So you can see it's like just kissing the edge of that petal there. And then I'm also going to add a layer mask because I want to take a little bit of that texture off of the flower itself. So I'm going to grab my paintbrush, make sure I'm on a soft round brush, which I am. I'm going to make that brush bigger, or we'll be here all night. And I want to lower the opacity of my brush because I don't want to take all of the texture off right away. I'm going to lower it to around 50%. You don't have to be precise. And just brush in here a little bit and take some of that texture off. If you want to take more of it off, you can just paint over that particular area again. And then as I paint, you'll see over here on the mask where we've taken the texture off. So, you know, if you've missed some areas and if you want to get closer to the edges, make your brush a little bit smaller. I think that looks pretty good. So that is our first project. And Stephen, guys, and Mike, if you have any questions at the end of each project, feel free to jump in if there's something that that you need me to repeat or questions about a process I'm doing. Feel free to type it in the chat box.
Right. Hey, so we do have some questions.
Sure.
First one is about the going from 300 DPI.
Mm-hmm.
You do this only on your cell phone shots, or?
Well, I always work with 300, but when the images come out of my camera, I have it set so that they're going to be at 300 DPI, but because this is a cell phone shot, it defaults to 72. So that's why I had to change it for this one. Typically, I don't need to change that. My raw files are already at 300 DPI.
All right, we've got some kind of generic Topaz questions.
Sure.
Particularly with regard to Studio. If they're running it in Lightroom, can they do it also in Photoshop?
You can go from Lightroom to Studio. The thing is with Lightroom, you can't do layers. So to do a border like this, you need to be in either Photoshop Elements. You can do them in On1, Affinity, any program that can do layers, which Lightroom cannot do.
Okay, and
but you can work from Topaz from Lightroom.
Right, and the last one is with regard to AI Clear.
Mm-hmm.
It's no longer available. Would you recommend something else?
It is available. It is not sold separately. That is part of Studio 2. So if you have Studio 2 or you purchase Studio 2, and there's going to be in all the stuff at the end a discount link for you as well. I think Studio now sells for like $99. But if you have Studio 1 and bought some of those presets, you'll get special pricing based on what you have in the past. But AI Clear was never a separate product. It used to be one of the pro adjustments in Studio 1, but now it comes automatically. All of the pro adjustments are automatic in Studio 2.
Okay, and one real quick one here. Are you working on Surface or using a stylus?
I'm working with a mouse. I do have a tablet, a Wacom pad, and I actually just started testing using it again the other day, and I was like, oh, this is going to take a whole lot more practice than what I remember. So I'm so used to the mouse, but I definitely use a mouse. Even if I'm on my laptop when I'm teaching a live class, I always have a mouse with me. I cannot use the touchpads. Those just drive me crazy.
Okay, why don't you jump ahead and we'll catch up on some questions maybe later.
All righty. So I'm going to close this one. I'm not going to save it. Normally I would do a save as and rename it, and that's how I save my files. But because I already have this saved, we'll just close it for now. And then I'm going to bring in my next image. Again, I'm dragging it from another screen. So that's why I'm not going up to the file open, because we're doing it this way. And this is just another fairly simple process you can do on an image. This was a perfectly fine image the way it was. I loved, you know, all of the wildflowers here in the field with the barn and a decent sky. But I always like to jazz things up a little bit because that's just me. That's what I like to do. So I duplicate my background layer. We're going to go in and do our AI clear. So we'll go over to Studio. And it takes a few seconds to open. And I'll show you real quick on the filter menu. I have a short menu here because I have just my favorites open. If you click on filters, all of these filters, they have essential category, creative things, and then the stylistic filters. These are all included with Studio 2. So when you get the product, you get all of these. And the ones I use most often, I favorited just so that it makes it quicker to go through the list. I'm going to go ahead and do our AI clear, and this little blue bar you see is the progress of it applying that filter. Okay, so once it gets to the end, I can see that it made a little change there, so we're going to click accept and go back to our Photoshop. And again, you could rename if you wish, and I always duplicate it, and I am going to do a preset on this one, or a look. They've been presets forever, and now they changed it in Studio 2 to looks, and I still call them presets quite often because that's just what I'm used to. All right, so we're going to go into the add a look. This one is called Lavender Meadow. Give it a second to load. I'm going to hit apply. Again, I can open it up. Sometimes I will decide I don't like a particular texture that was part of that preset, and then I might change it out to something else. You can click on that layer. Oh, I guess I can hide this little guy down here, huh? I didn't know you guys could see that. Okay, my husband just came in and told me I could do that. What would I do without my hubby? He's my reminder. But if you click on each of these items under the preset, it will take you to that texture. So if you decided I don't like that one, or you could turn the eyeball on and off to, you know, see what it looks like without it, and decide if you want to change stuff out. So a lot of times I will do that. I happen to like this particular look, but I am going to add another texture because I want to strengthen the border on this a little bit and give it a little more of a vignette. But I'm not going to use the vignette tool. There are some borders that are really cool for that. So I'm going to click on add a filter and choose texture. And the other thing you'll notice when you go into the texture category, if you go into the categories, there is one called Meredith Images. There are 59 of my textures that are included with Studio 2 that Topaz obtained for me. So I have extra categories because I've added a bunch of my own in here as well. And I can show you real quick how to do that. If you want to add your own textures or any that you've purchased or anything else, you just click on this little texture manager little button there, and you can add a category, and you can call it whatever you want. My own textures. Say OK. And then you'll just click on import a texture, and you'll go to wherever it happens to be. I'll just pick this one. This was in a different folder. You can do a bunch at a time. They just need to be in the same folder when you're importing them, and say OK. And there you go. So you can add it, you can rename it. If you decide later you don't want it, you can hit the little trash can and trash either the category or just particular textures. So then you would say close, and then you could go to that category, they're alphabetical, my own textures, and there's that one we just brought in. So that's another cool thing that you can do here. So we're going to go back to all, and I'm going to click on the group borders because I just want to see borders and not textures right now. And the one that I'm going to use is called Border Fade 6. And it was funny because when I was doing my run through yesterday, I clicked on this one and I'm like, that doesn't look like my sample. There's actually 2 that are named Border Fade 6. And I was like, oh, that's really weird. So it's the second one that I've actually used on this product. So I am going to leave the blending mode for this at multiply, but I'm going to make it a little bit stronger and bring the opacity up to about 70%. So you can see it's added a little bit more definition to a border, and that was what I was going for. So then we would say accept and go back to Photoshop. And that simply, I've taken what I consider, yeah, it's a nice image, it's okay, and just made it a little more unique and more my style and personality. So that's the end of project 2. Like if you want to put up poll number 1, I just wanted to get a feel for how many of you have used textures to date. So that's our first poll question. And if we have any other questions that you want to pop over, we can do that.
Okay, Hazel, the poll is running. Give it a couple moments and we'll see how many are chiming in here.
All righty.
For those who don't know where it is, it's at the bottom of the chat screen. You should see the poll there.
Perfect.
And while we're waiting, we do have a question about the slider and how you use it.
The one that was in studio?
Yes.
All right, let me get rid of that layer. We'll go back over there real quick. What that's doing, it's just like the slider up here for opacity, and it's controlling the opacity of that, either the look or the filter that you just applied. So we can add, let's add our look again. Lavender Meadow. So if I wanted to apply this look and I thought I like the look, but maybe it's a little too strong, you can also use this opacity slider, it's still loading, which would change the strength of that particular look. So sometimes I'll apply something and go, oh, I like that look, but it's a little too heavy-handed, and you could bring that back a little and lessen that effect. And then again, if you do that with like a texture or any other filter, they all have some type of opacity slider, and textures default to a normal blending mode and 50% slider. The borders typically default to, I think, yeah, multiply, which is generally what you want because it's going to darken something when you're using a multiply blending mode. And it defaults to the 50%, and I wanted it to be a little bit stronger, so that's why I went up to like 70%. So I made it just a little more noticeable on the image. So there's different, depending on what either preset you're on or what filter you're on, you're going to have different controls. But once you click on that layer, and to close this particular function, you can just hit that little X. And then if I wanted to go back to that texture layer, you just click it and it would come back up again. So you can always go back in as long as you're in here.
Okay, the numbers are in. It looks like most people have used textures before. We got like 81% yes and 18% no.
Okay, well, that's really
20.
good.
Okay.
Oh, awesome. All right, so let's cancel this since we've already done it, and we'll close this one. And I'm going to, on the next one, I'm going to show you 2 different ways to process this image that are going to give you a totally different look. So one is going to be more of, I just want to brighten this up a little. I'm going to add to this sky and give it a little more color. And then the second version, we're going to do a texture, which is going to give it a totally different look. But just to give you an idea of how you can play around with images and do some different things. So I am going to duplicate this layer. I'm going to turn off my background layer for a moment because I want you to see the blank sky once it pops up. So I'm going to, for this one, use the quick selection tool. And there's a fairly new function. I think it's been in for maybe a couple versions of Photoshop called Select Subject. Sometimes it does a good job, sometimes not so much. in this one, it's done a pretty good job of selecting the building. I'm going to add to my selection though. Make my brush a little bigger so we can see it. I also want to select the other buildings here, just so that we have our sky here. So we want to select everything else. And I'll be close enough for what we're doing right now, because we're already halfway into the webinar and I've got a lot more to cover. So I'm going to, basically instead of deleting the sky, I'm going to use a layer mask to hide the sky. So I'm going to do a select inverse. So now our sky is selected. And then I'm going to click on the add a layer mask button. And oops, I did it backwards. I shouldn't have inversed that one. I always get confused with that. All right, there we go. So I've made the selection of the building, and so it masked the sky. So now I can bring in a new sky. So I'm going to drag in a shot I took of just some nice white puffy clouds, because this was, when we took this in Baltimore, it was a very gray, blah day. And I'm going to put that about there and say okay. And then I want to drag that down behind my building. And I didn't have to worry about it going all the way to the bottom because we only needed the clouds, behind the actual buildings. But what I also need to do now is the water looks like it doesn't really match because it's not blue enough. So I am going to duplicate this cloud layer. And I'm going to go edit, transform, flip horizontal, because I want it to be a mirror image. And then I'm going to use the move tool, and we're going to move this down just till it's just beneath the building. And that one I actually need to have on top. So we're going to drag that up, and I'm going to change my blending mode to color burn, and then bring back that opacity. So we're going to add a little bit of color to our water and make it look a little more blendable, believable with our sky that we put in there. Alrighty, so that is actually, I use soft light, not okay. My husband just said I should redo the inverse selection. Actually, I didn't need to inverse this one. Sometimes you do. It depends if you're selecting what you want to mask. It's like opposite of when you're actually using a brush tool. So as you can see, I get confused too. Actually, I'm going to go to soft light and bring this up instead of color burn. I wanted to do the color burn on the clouds. There we go. Okay. Change the blending mode. I'm reading my notes too. So these are the notes that you can get and follow along with these projects later. So you can see that you don't always have to have the textures covering the entire image. It just depends on what it is that you're trying to accomplish with that texture. So I'm going to turn these three off, turn our background back on, and then I'm going to show you a totally different way that you can work with textures. So these are just hidden. They're not going to affect anything. We could delete them too. Actually, I'll do that just to get them out of the way. So we're going to start with this, my Control J, and I'm going to bring in a texture. This is from one of my packs. And because the texture is horizontal, I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees. And then we're going to cover our image. And then for this one, I'm going to change this blending mode to darker color and bring the opacity down to about 70%. And then I'm going to add a new blank layer. And this is similar to the grunge border I brought in on the rose. Along with that border set, it comes both as PNGs and as brushes. So for this one, I'm going to use the brush and have them installed here. And I'm going to use Grunge 4. And I'm going to change the color of this, and I have the color written down. I'm going to use a brown 4D46 and say OK. And the way we use these brushes, and they need to be on a separate layer so that you can stretch them and blend them. I make it as big as I can to almost cover the image, and I'm going to click just one time, and then I'm going to do the Control or Command T, and we're going to stretch that out to cover the image. And this one I am going to do linear burn and lower my opacity to about 75%. And there we go. So that obviously is a completely different look than what we got by just changing out the clouds. But that's the kind of fun that you can have with your images, to make them different. All right. Let's close this one. Do we have any questions that are urgent?
I think in the interest of time, we should just move on.
Okay.
Good. We do have a lot of questions, but
yeah, I know it's difficult.
Going back and repeating things. So
if you can as well,
we'll have them.
When I would say if you could print them or save the file. What I usually do is answer some questions in my blog posts after I do webinars as well, so that way I know we can't always get to everything during a webinar.
Will do. Thanks.
Sure. So we're going to go ahead and do our AI clear. This was last spring in the Smokies. The dogwoods out, so that was in late April. So we're going to do our AI clear. And this one, I'm going to show you how to do a cool shape border on this one, and kind of create your own border. So let me go back to Photoshop. I'm going to bring in a texture first. This is also one of mine. And this is going to give it a nice warm color. We're going to change this to soft light and bring the opacity down just a little bit, about 90%. Alrighty. And then the next thing we're going to do, we're going to use, okay, I'm going to bring in a crop shape, but I want to merge it with all of these layers. So I'm going to create a layer that combines everything beneath it so that I have a layer that I can work with. And the way I'm going to do this is a keyboard shortcut. It's Control, Alt, Shift, and the letter E. On a Mac, that would be Command, Option, Shift, E. So now this layer combines anything below it. So if I had 15 layers, it would all be combined into this one layer. I do this often too if I want it, like at this point, if I wanted to go into Photoshop, I'm sorry, into Topaz and do a preset or something that I want to apply to the whole image. Because if I were on this layer and I went to Topaz, then it would only see that layer. It can't see all of the other layers. So that's the reason for doing a merged layer. In this case, I'm going to bring in a crop shape. This is also one of mine. And we're going to stretch this out. And I'm going to bring the shape under this layer, because I'm going to turn these layers off so you can see the process happen. I'm going to group this layer with the crop shape because I want the picture to take on the boundaries of this shape. And that is Control Alt G. So I'm grouping these two layers, and you'll see it kind of jumped over, and there's a little arrow pointing down letting you know that those are clipped together. So from here I can now add a color or something else that I wanted in the background. So I'm going to add a new blank layer, and I'm clicking on this layer to do it because anytime you add a layer, it adds above the active layer. So I want this color layer to be behind my shape. So it just saved me having to drag it down. I'm going to choose my foreground color picker, and I want to do color 73624. And we can always change this color. So I'm going to start with that one. You can also choose a color from within your image, which I think is how I originally got that. I think I'm going to go a little bit later. So we go here, and then you can kind of fine tune it there. I'm going to fill this layer with color and alter option. No, on a PC, it's alt backspace. To fill a layer on a Mac, it's option delete. So it's slightly different. So now I have some color in the background, but I don't want it to just look like it was cut out and plopped on this color. I'm going to go back to my shape layer, and I'm going to double click over here in the blank area to open up the layer styles panel. And I'm going to do a couple of things to this to give it the shape a little more depth. I'm going to use bevel and emboss. And then you have to make sure you click on that row to get the proper controls in here. And I should have remembered what I did last. And those are the correct settings. And then I'm also going to do a drop shadow. And I like to do my drop shadows at 135 degrees, so I have the light coming from the upper left. Let's see, 30%. Those are all good. So then I'm going to say OK. Now, even though we've grouped these layers together, we can still change this layer. So if I wanted to stretch it a little, I can do the Control T and get the handles back. Click on my move tool and just you know, get it a little bit closer to the edge of the image if we wanted to. Stretch it that way a little, and you can see, lets more of the picture show. The other thing we can do is if there's an area where the shape happened to cut into, say, your image, you can just grab a brush, and in this case, I like to use the Kyle's Chunky Charcoal. And oh, I forgot. Because I dragged it in, it came in as a smart object, so I just have to rasterize this layer. And so now I can, I got rid of my things I did. I should have done that first. Okay, and I made my border too big, my drop shadow. Let's make that. Okay, well, I'm going to move on, even though it kind of messed me up here. I think I rasterized that wrong. But what I wanted to show you was if you wanted to fill in, you can make your brush black, and you can just paint, and you're actually adding to that shape. So if you wanted to, make sure, hide a few of the holes or grab some more of the picture around the edges, you can go ahead and with a brush do that. And that would be our finished image, except that I would have to adjust that drop shadow because that looks pretty horrible. All right, so we're at the end of project 4. If you want to throw out poll number 2, we can see how many people are using Topaz. And then I'll start on the next project while you're doing that.
All right, the poll is running.
All righty. So I'm going to show you the image I started with, and then I'm going to show, I cropped this down drastically, but for the sake of time, I have one already cropped and somewhat ready to go. So this is the cropped version. So we went from here to here. Close that one. Do my Control J. Again, this all started in Lightroom, and I did my basic stuff there. So I also wanted to get rid of these excess flowers up here. So we could do the smudge tool like we did on the first project. That would give me an easy way to get rid of some of this stuff up here. What I also was trying, I'm going to undo that for a second, show you another way we can do it, is I took just a soft round brush and I selected a color that was like the green right there. And then you could basically just paint, oops, well, it helps if you're on the brush. Let's try that again. You could just paint to kind of match that background. So whichever way is easier. Sometimes it's a combination of styles when you're, trying to do things. And you can just use the smudge or then paint over it as needed. I said, I think I did this, and then I added a little bit of paint to just add a little color to that as well. And I'm going to say, okay, go back to my brush. I'm going to lower the opacity of that a little bit so it's not too heavy, and just, paint a little color to give it a little shadow to match more of the rest of it. Obviously, I'm doing this very quickly because I want to get through these last couple projects, but you get the idea.
All right. Hey, the numbers are in. It looks like a good majority of the folks are out there, 85 to 15.
Wow.
We
You
got
guys
a
are good.
lot of veterans out there.
Yeah, I guess so. All righty. That's pretty awesome. I'm glad to hear that. Because I think, Topaz is a great product, and it can do a lot for your images. And then working with textures, of course, is my favorite thing to do. All right, so we are, oh, and the other thing that I didn't do here was I should have painted this on a separate layer, so then you can also play more with the opacity. I have that in my notes, and I didn't read that part of my own notes. And the other thing I did too is I wanted to paint over this really dark area, because as I started processing this, I came back to it and it just stood out a little too much. So let's do, I think it's the same color. Let me try this color, 828765. And I just painted a little bit here to make that more like the rest of the background. This didn't bother me as much, but this kind of stood out when I was getting to that area. So there we go. And I would smooth that out probably with the healing brush. Often is a good way to smooth out when you've done painting and that kind of stuff. I'll often use that. And sometimes it works, and sometimes you get weird things. Undo, redo. Alrighty, so next I'm going to duplicate that there. And then I'm going to do my AI clear. Oh, the other thing I did was I did heal a few of those little spots on the petals. So that's another way you can use your healing brush. Say okay, and then I'm going to bring in another bokeh texture. And this one we're going to change to soft light and bring it down to 80%. And then I was playing around with, I wanted some kind of a border on here. I didn't like the whole background, so I tried a different kind of a crop shape. I'm going to use this in a slightly different way, and I did rotate it. And then I started playing around with stretching it to almost cover the flower, cover most of it anyway. And then, oh, I got to turn that off for a second because I want to create that merged layer so that we can group those together. Control-Alt-Shift-E. And then we're going to bring that border underneath I'll turn these guys off. Control-Alt-G. Whoops, gotta turn that one back on. So that was our shape. And then I clipped that, and then I added a new blank layer. And I'm going to choose a color. 798.55. Alt backspace to fill it. And then, again, you could tweak the shape with a brush if you wanted to change that. And I think I'm missing something in my notes. I'm missing a page because I know I did something else on this. I have to check that, make sure my notes are correct for you guys. I'm going to open up my Word doc for just a quick second. And then we're going to do another one real quick at the end. Because I know this looks a whole lot better with the next one. I'm going to have to check that. All right. So I'll just show you the finished one because I kind of messed up here. But I did another layer. I think I was, oh, that's what I did was I just turned these back on. All right, let's go back to that. I'm like, something's not looking right here. And I changed the opacity of that to 50%. So that was my difference. There we go. That's a little better. So here's the real finished one that I took a little more time to finesse the shape a little. But it was just a cool way to add a little more drama to an image and give it a really pretty background. Alrighty. And we have one more. And this picture is actually one of my husband Dave's that he took on his cell phone. He was out one morning doing some errands, heading to our friend's house, and saw this. Somebody does live here, and they have some really cool old barns on their property too. So the first thing I did with this one, it did have a antenna up here, a TV antenna, and some wires. So I did clone those out to make it a faster process. And this one, I must say, I had a really tough time with the sky and the tree. I used Topaz Remask, or Mask AI, and it still was giving me kind of halos around here. So for quickness sake, I'm going to open up the finished one to show you at least that part, so we don't take too much time now. You can do the Photoshop select subject. That seemed to do just about as well as the Topaz products did. So once we got to having no sky in our image, let's see if I got everything else shut off. There we go. I brought in a new sky, just dragged it in like we did before. And you can see on the layer that I only worried about covering this part of the image. And you'll see when I made my selection, see how it also grasps some of the house. So that's why if I turn this layer back on, I just brought that back through that image because the trees are covering the sky portion. So sometimes you got to tweak and play around with things a little bit. And then I did make sure that so that would show through properly, I added a layer mask to the sky so that the sky was only in that area. And then I created the merged layer. Though in this one we didn't really need to because I didn't go back to Topaz with it. I used my own textures. So I'm just going to show you the textures I brought in. This one is called Peacock Blend, and I did this one at multiply and 50%. And then I brought in this rusty one and did soft light and 75%. And then I decided I liked the texture but not the color. So I'm going to undo this layer so I can show you how I did this. I wanted to make this a black and white. So I'm going to add a black and white adjustment, but I only wanted to apply to that layer, not the entire image. So the way that we group things with the crop shapes, you can also do the Control-Alt-G and group that black and white adjustment only is now affecting this texture. So you can see the big difference between the brown color and just the effect of the texture without the color in it. And I like that a whole lot better. And then I brought in more of the grunge frames. I did that one with the brush, the same way we did with the other. And that is our, excuse me, last project. So we do have a packet of info that they're going to post for you guys to download to your computer and take a look at. And I'll talk about it while we're doing that. In it is included my Topaz affiliate link. If you use my link and my code Meredith Images at checkout, if there's anything you need to add to your collection, you can save 15%. The second page of that, there is a code for all you guys listening today, 25% off my ebooks, textures, and personal training. It's Maryland 25. And that is good until June 25th. So you've got a couple of weeks to use that. So any of the textures, other than the ones that are half price right now, all my other textures, ebooks, and personal training. And then there's a page talking about our fall Barns and Backroads workshops down here in Tennessee. Most of you who already know me know I used to live in Connecticut until the end of October of last year, and Dave and I relocated to beautiful Northeast Tennessee. So thus all of these great old barns and buildings we have down here. These were going to be spring workshops, but of course with everything going on right now, we've postponed them to the fall, and I do have some openings still in September. I think the October ones are all full, but there are some in the November ones as well. And then there's a flyer on those. Yes, and it does say how many slots we have open. And then there's also some info on our creative photography conference. We had originally, even though we were still in New England, we were going to relocate it and start moving it around the country, whether we moved or not. But since we did move, we decided to have it in Tennessee. Again, this was supposed to be in the spring, and it got postponed to October 10th and 11th. And you can save $25 on registration with the code in this packet as well through the end of this month. And we've got a bunch of speakers. It's 2 full days of creativity. We've got 5 people speaking. It's going to cover Topaz, textures, creative Photoshop. There's going to be some photo walks. Friend of mine, Loretta, shows you how to create textures using alcohol inks. They're going to have a session on iPhoneography, all kinds of good stuff. And I've got a gal who does some digital compositing with her iPhones, which are amazing work. And then there's some info on personal training. If you want to work with me one-on-one, I've been doing online stuff for a couple of years now. And we use Zoom and screen share, and we can cover anything that you want to learn. So you can also save 25% on that. And then again, the notes for today's webinar are just $5, and those are available in my website, meredithimages.com. Under the Peacock Studio is where all of my products are. And that's a wrap, and it's exactly 5 o'clock. So maybe we have a couple questions we can take real quick. You guys there?
Yep, I'm here.
Hi.
I was just going to say
like,
that.
Oh no, what did I do?
I was just going to say that Dave's been doing such a great job answering all the questions, and I have them all saved here.
Okay.
So I'll send them to you, and a lot of them are very specific to actual techniques.
Okay.
And some questions about Topaz, technical questions.
Okay.
So they you might be able to condense your answer into one question or two and
Sounds good.
put an answer out there.
All right.
Thank you.
I'd be happy to do that.
And also on everybody's chat window is Hazel's $5 offer, which includes the notes from today's webinar and some textures. And anything else you want to mention about that package, Hazel?
Yeah, like I said, it includes the images that you saw me work on today, the 6 images, plus all of the textures I used so that you can recreate them at home and follow along with the notes. And yeah, everything is right there. And there's something else I was going to add and I forgot.
And we'll keep that up. Hazel, on behalf of the Maryland Photography Alliance, we certainly want to thank you for your outstanding presentation today. You helped us achieve one of our goals, which was to provide some education. So thank you so much.
No problem. Glad to be here.
We've got a lot more webinars coming up. These are the dates, guys. I'm just going to run through this pretty quick. We have some other outstanding events and artists. We've got Brian Peterson, who we were fortunate enough to have him commit to doing a webinar yesterday, and he's going to do his on June 29th, which is a couple of weeks. We'll have registration open for that real soon. July 7th, Chuck Kimmerly, great black and white photographer. He'll talk about landscape photography. We've got Rick Salmon, who also committed yesterday. And we discussed what topic, and certainly during these times, you know, how to get motivated and stay inspired. And he's got a great presentation for that. July 23rd, Charles Needle, impressionistic photography. And the list goes on and on. Mike Moats will talk about the properly equipped macro photographer on August 4th. And Cole Thompson will wrap up our summer series on August 18th on why black and white. We're also going to put
lineup.
Oh, thank you. And you were part of it. You were part of it.
Thank you.
So, Mike, if you could put up the offer for the Maryland Photography donation window. The Artist Spotlight series is for educating and fundraising, as we mentioned. You know, even a $1 donation can go a long way, since it can help feed 3 people. So if you enjoyed today's presentation, please consider donating. All you have to do is to click the link in the window, the chat window on the right-hand side. That link will take you to MPA's fundraising site on the Maryland Food Bank's website. So all donations go directly to the food bank. On behalf of our team, thank you, Hazel, for your presentation, and thank all of you for attending and making a donation. Everybody be safe and well. Take care.